Hello, and welcome back to Cage and Beaten. As always, remember that there is a huge trigger warning for violence and mentions of sexual assault. Today's story is about a man named Harold Scott. He chose to share his story through the New York Times and the Marshall Project. In June of 2019, Scott attended the Willard Drug Treatment Campus to begin his 90-day sentence for violating his parole. Documentation stated that he got into a dispute over rubber bands in his dreadlocks with an officer named Timothy Downs. During this dispute, Officer Downs slapped Scott in the face, which then resulted in Scott hitting Downs back. This sparked, and I quote, a criminal street-style gang beating. Said beating included multiple guards kicking and punching Scott even after he had been handcuffed. Scott was then rushed to the hospital, where he experienced life-threatening injuries, one being a punctured lung. This case is a weird one. Scott hadn't been the one to report the guards. The day after the beating took place, police questioned Scott in the hospital. Investigators also questioned the officers involved in the beating. All of their stories seemed to line up perfectly. Almost too perfect. During important sections of their reports, each officer had identical retellings. They had claimed that Scott had started the fight, and the beating stopped once Scott was handcuffed. It was concluded that the officers' reports were falsified, and officials decided to fire the officers. Unfortunately, the story doesn't end there. The union challenged this decision and argued that Mr. Scott was incredible. They used his criminal history of assault, burglary, and an altercation with officers in 2002 against him. The union lawyers wrote, and as I quote from the New York Times, "He is not a good guy." I'm going to pause the story for a moment. Just because Scott has a criminal history does not mean that he deserves to be beaten and almost killed. He is still a person. Continuing on, in the end, arbitrators agreed that Scott had been beaten, but there was no way to prove who did it. Yet, if Scott was rushed to the hospital after being with the guards, how could it not be them? Due to the arbitrator's decision, the officers were suspended for 6 months for only covering up the beating. Once Scott was released from the hospital, he was accused of assault and violent conduct, leading to months in solitary confinement. This beating left Scott with lasting injuries. In his interviews with the Marshall Project in the New York Times, he stated that he still has a hard time breathing and has to speak softly because it hurts to talk. Not only was Scott punished for being beaten, but he has to live the rest of his life with the after effects of these injuries. As always, changes need to be made. Take time to research different alternatives like restorative justice and look for ways to make a change. We can make an impact only if there is an effort. Thank you for listening, and tune in next week for the next episode of Caged and Beaten.